So what you should have now is a fully working two-player game of tic-tac-toe with a little bit of error checking and some possible errors. Like when the game is over, it doesn't reset. So in this next stage of the project, we're going to add a little more functionality. First thing I want to do is I want to fix this problem of once the game is over, it doesn't reset. I can actually keep playing, and the user should never have to hit the reload button to reload the game. The game should do that. So we're going to go back to a part of the JavaScript that we left off commented but uncoded. Okay. So if the game is over, show the controls. I've used the word controls to describe a button that will reset the game. So again, we're going to have to add a little bit of HTML, a little bit of CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript to get this all to work. So let's begin in the HTML. So note where I am. I am not inside main. I am not inside the lightbox. I am not inside position message. I am just inside the body. And I'm going to add a new div tag with the ID controls. And I'm going to give it the class equals hidden. And inside controls, I'm going to create a button. I'm going to call the button new button, meaning new game button. And I'm going to make it clickable using a non-click event. And I'm going to call a function that we haven't written yet called new game. So new game is just going to reset all of the div tags to not contain any X's or O's. It will reset number of turns and whatever other variables need to be reset. And the button's going to say start new game. Okay, let's jump to your CSS and we'll add the CSS that we need for this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make controls look somewhat, well, the properties for controls are going to look somewhat similar to the properties for the lightbox. We're going to make position fixed. We're going to make top 0 pixels from the top and 0 pixels from the left. And we're going to make the width and the height 100%. So it's going to take up the entire screen, just like the lightbox. It's going to be fixed, so if the user tries to scroll the screen, it's going to keep in position. We've positioned the HTML in such a way that it's going to be placed on top of the actual board, the tic-tac-toe board, but we're not going to make it visible. We're making it invisible. And the reason we're doing that is because if you have the entire board exposed, the user can go around and click on everything, and they can keep clicking things, and it's actually really annoying to try to code JavaScript so that these boxes become unclickable. But there's a quick little trick you can do where you just take a div tag and put it on top of everything and don't make it clickable. And that div tag will be what you're clicking if it's on top of all this instead of the div tags behind it. And so we're going to use controls to literally just cover our board once the game is finished and before a new game has started, so the user can't go click, 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 and make our game look like it's really, really broken. Okay, so that's what that's doing. It's an invisible click blocker. Now, what you want your button to look like and where you want your button to be positioned is entirely up to you. I spent probably too much of my life trying to figure out all of that, and this is what I came up with. So I'm positioning it absolutely near the top of the page, but not quite at the top of the page, and on the right side of the page. Okay, so it's in the top right corner of my page. It's not very big. It's 40 pixels high by 100 pixels wide. I gave it a background color that matched one of my color palette colors. And I gave the text the dark purple from my color palette. And that is all. Okay, so again, please, I encourage you to use your own design, your own choices for all of that. Okay, so just to remind you, we've built the HTML for these controls, but they're hidden. So we can't see them yet. And we've built the CSS for them. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the JavaScript and I'm going to write new game. But before I do that, I'm actually going to go to the top of my JavaScript. So when I was developing this version of Tic Tac Toe, I discovered that it was actually quite beneficial to create a global array called ID names that stores the names of each ID. So I just took the liberty of copying and pasting it. So take the time, and it doesn't matter that 1 is in the 0th place and 2 is in the 1's place in the way that we're going to use it. But this is actually going to make it so we can use a for loop or a do while loop or a while loop, any loop, to go through and set the inner HTML of these 9 div tags to the empty string. So I'm going to write the one function that we have that we were about to write called new game. And I'm just going to put it at the top here because I want to be able to see my array when I'm writing it. And it's going to reset the board and all the variables. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to reset the inner HTML of all 9 div tags. Now, because I wrote an array with the names of all of them, I can literally just say take document.getElementById array element 0 and make it empty string, and then array element 1 and make it empty string. And of course, the best loop for that is, oops, this is not Java. This is JavaScript. So I don't really need to declare my variable, although it would be better to put var there. So I equals 0, I is less than ID names dot length. So like Java, arrays name dot length will give you the length of the array, I++. So this is your standard for loop to go iterate through an array. And we're going to make the element, we're going to grab each element by its ID, okay, but remember the IDs are in the array. So you can go ID names I. So when I is 0, ID names is equal to 1, and this will get the element with the ID 1. And we want to make its inner HTML equal to the empty string. Okay, the only other thing we need to do if you want to do a new game is we have to reset some variables. I just realized I should put a comment here, reset the board. Okay, and the variables that we need to reset are current player, make sure it's X and not O accidentally, game status to empty string, which means it's going to continue, and num turns back to 0. And then after all that's reset, we want to hide the start button and its container controls, which is stopping the game from being clicked on. Okay, so almost done. Scroll down to continue game and find that line that we wrote where it says if the game is over, show the controls. So what we want to do is, so we know that the game status records the status of the game. And we know that if game status is not empty, the game is over. So if the game is over, we want to block anyone from clicking, and we want to show the Start New Game button. So that means we need to change the visibility of controls. Okay, so just scroll back up to New Game. I just realized I had a bit of an error in my code. This should be ID names. The name of the array is ID names. So just make sure that you don't have that mistake in your code as well. Okay, so once everything is saved, let's try this out. So reload. Just a reminder that mine will only win if I win across the top. So let's try a tie game. Okay, so that part worked. It did catch the tie game. If I close the game over box, there's my Start New Game button. I encourage you to make it look better. But the thing I want you to know here is I cannot click. Nothing is happening. There's no console.logs printing. There's no error messages happening. And that's because we've got this whole page covered by the invisible div tag controls. So what is clickable on the screen is the Start New Game, which calls the function New Game, which resets everything back to 0, and now I can start a second game. Oh, I guess I'm doing a tie again. I was actually hoping to get a win just to make sure that win works. Yeah, so a win works. Let's try clicking the same thing twice. That error works, and can I keep playing? Yes, I can. Yeah, so far it's looking pretty good. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a computer player. So right now we've got a working 2-player game, but I want to make it a working 1-player game. So in this kind of interface, every bit of code that runs is running on a previous event. So right now, if I click, then this gets filled out. If I click and make a mistake, then this appears. If I click this, it continues the game. If I get a tie, my last click caused this event to happen. When I click this, it makes all of this to appear. The game doesn't get reset until I click Start New Game. So the entire interface has been running on click events. So we're going to continue going with that. So what I want to have happen is after I click, I want the computer to put an O somewhere. So go into your JavaScript and go into the function player take turn and go into the first if statement. So the first if statement, just to remind you, checks that the element clicked by the user is empty. And if it is, it changes the inner HTML to the current player, which if it's the first player is X, and checks the game status to see if anyone has won or if there's a tie. So what we want to have happen is have the computer go next. So one thing that's kind of unique in tic-tac-toe is let's pretend the computer is O. Okay, so X goes and then the computer, or O goes, and then X goes and then O goes, and then X goes and then O goes, and then X goes and then O goes, and then X goes. So the O always goes after an X, but not every time. So in fact, X is always going to get 5 turns, O is always going to get 4 turns. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to code in here at the computer turn if there is a turn to be had. So we know the computer will take a turn if the game is still going. If there's been no win, there's been no tie, the game is still going. So just put in a comment here. If game not over, computer goes. So we've already done this a couple places. If game status is equal to the empty string, the game is still going, because if game status is equal to tied game, X wins or O wins, the game is over. And we're going to write a new function called computer take turn. So we'll call it from here. And then after every turn, we always have to check game status, so we will also call check game status here. Okay. So we don't have to write this, we've already written it, but we do need to write computer take turn. Okay, so here I've put the structure for the function computer take turn. We're going to make a really dumb computer, one that's just going to randomly choose a free box. So we're going to use random numbers the same as you did in Java to randomly choose a number between 1 and 9, and if that box is empty, then the computer is going to take it. So we're going to need a for loop, we're going to need random numbers. This is an algorithm that you should be familiar with. Okay, so let's start off by creating a local variable called rand, which is short for random number. And the way you do random numbers in JavaScript is math.random. Does that look familiar? And you want to multiply this by 9, which will give us a random number between, so math.random works the same as it does in Java. It produces a random number between 0 and, but not equal to 1. You multiply it by 9, that's going to give you a random number between 0 and 8.9 repeating. We want to parse it to an int, or you can't cast to an int in JavaScript, but there is a function called parseInt, which does the same as in Java, integer.parseInt. So if math.random is 0 point something, then math.random, sorry, if this is 0 point something, it's going to give you 0. If it's 1 point something, it gives you 1, etc. And then add the minimum value, which is 1. So this will produce random numbers between 0 and 8. Add 1 to it, and you're getting random numbers between 1 and 9. Okay, we are going to use our array again that we created at the top of our function, or top of our code, called ID names. And we're going to use, we're going to create a local variable called ID name. And we're going to start off by initializing it to the empty string, and we're going to use it a little bit later. Okay, and the algorithm here is to generate random numbers until we find one that is empty. Actually, let's say choose random boxes until an empty box is found. I'm going to use a do loop because we definitely are going to want to choose at least one, so do while. And I'm actually just going to make it an infinite loop, and we'll use a break to get out of it if the right condition happens. Just realize that I want this to be inside the do while loop, so just cut and paste that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to fetch the name of, we're going to fetch the name of the ID from the ID names array. Now I do have to subtract 1 from random because the ID names are all shifted by 1, meaning 1 is stored in 0 and 2 is stored in 1, etc. And now we're going to check to see if that div tag is empty. So that means we have to use document.getElementById. by ID. And we've already got the name of the ID, and we want to see if its inner HTML is empty. And if it is, we want to update the inner HTML of the same element, so you can copy and paste that, to the current player. Now, because we know it's the computer player's turn, it's going to be O, but we've already dealt with that somewhere else in the code where it toggles between X and O, so that will be setting it to O. And then we want to break out of the loop because we've happily found our empty box. If the box isn't empty, then we're going to repeat the loop, pick a different random number, well, pick another random number, and this loop will run until an empty random is found, an empty random box. And that is the end of our computer take turn function. So let's test it out. I clicked this box and then the computer went there. I clicked this box, 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 game is tied. Okay, let's try a new game and see if I can win. Yes, I can. Okay. So you might have noticed a couple of things, like when I click X, both the X and the O appear simultaneously. And it might be confusing. So wouldn't it be nice if we could make the X appear and then have the computer delay a little bit and then go? So there is something in JavaScript called set timeout. And what it does is it takes two parameters. The first one will be an anonymous function that runs some code that you want to run in however many milliseconds are specified as the second parameter. So what I want to do is after the user, let's just go back up to player take turn. After the user has taken their turn, if the game's not over and the computer's supposed to go, I actually want to delay those two lines of code running by a little bit. So I'm going to show you how to do that. What you do is you write set timeout. Okay, now that round bracket needs a semicolon after it. And that round bracket is actually going to go all the way after both of these function calls, okay? And we're going to write a lot more, so watch carefully. I'm going to tab these in. Okay, so the way, sorry. Okay, the way set timeout works is we're going to give it an anonymous function. So that's a function with no name, okay? And it has a set of curly brackets that contain the code that I want to run. Okay, so I'm going to set a timeout. I'm going to run this function, which is the first parameter in set timeout, followed by a comma, followed by the number of milliseconds to wait before I run that function. So I've tried a few different ones. I'm going to try 500 milliseconds. Okay, and so that's half a second. 500 milliseconds is half a second. So what this should do is if the user clicks and the game is still going, it should wait 500 milliseconds and then have the computer take a turn and check the game status. Let's just try that. Ah, there you go. Okay, one more thing that I'd like to fix in this game is notice when I click this, as soon as I clicked it, this popped up and said game over. I'd like there to be a delay there too. So we're going to use the same technique that if I do win, before I show the light box, I want to set a timeout. Okay, so we're going to make the first parameter an anonymous function that calls the function I want to call, followed by a comma. And the question is, can this all go on one line? If it's this short, it can. And then how long do I want to wait? I don't know. Why don't we go 500 milliseconds again? Let's see how that looks. Okay, so hopefully, so the O is going to, so remember, my game only works if I win across the top, because it's your job to make it so that you can win from any of the 8 combinations. Try again. Oh my goodness. There we go. So did you see there was a delay? You can make it longer if you think it needs to be longer, but it should definitely happen, well, it should happen fairly quickly, just not instantaneously. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the tic-tac-toe game.